Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison, and I talk about how one might prepare for a psychedelic journey. We discuss the 4 domains of preparation, the importance of intention setting, share some stories from the trenches, and of course, much, much more. As is customary, I want to thank all of you who have left us reviews in places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That is the easiest and most concrete way you can support this show. I want to thank everybody who have reached out to us via email and on social media. Folks, we won't know how to make this show better if you don't tell us, so feedback is much appreciated. Speaking of making the show better, a couple episodes ago I promised that there were big changes coming to the show. Those changes are coming. They're coming soon. And we think they're going to improve the quality of the show and really deliver more value to you as a loyal listener. So, thank you for listening. Please enjoy today's episode on how to prepare for a psychedelic journey. Reid, it's not uncommon for you or myself to get questions about how one might prepare for a psychedelic journey. I feel like we get these questions on our Instagram. I may or may not be mentioning Instagram, so you go follow us on Instagram. We get them via email, certainly get them in clinic. So we thought we've touched on a lot of these principles before in other episodes, like we had a whole episode dedicated to intentions, for example. But we thought it might be nice to just sort of have a little condensed episode on preparing for a psychedelic journey.
Yeah, we get asked by therapists how to prepare a client for psychedelic therapy, whether they're doing a ketamine session with that therapist at an outside clinic or whether they're going off to the jungle for ayahuasca. Mm-hmm. And from clients, like, what do? I signed up for this retreat next month or next year.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's this term in the psychedelic therapy world called harm reduction, where we have a lot of people who also will just ask us, hey, I got some mushrooms from a friend and I really want to have this psychedelic journey. What are some things I ought to know? And as licensed mental health providers, medical providers, we don't encourage the use of illicit substances. But if I have a client or a friend who's going to do this, I want to make sure I do whatever I can with knowledge that I have to reduce potential harm.
Yeah. And that is, even though I much prefer looking at it in a positive light, just personally, like the harm reduction term, I think has so much importance in the world at large. But when you're consciously picking or deciding to go on a journey, like I think then it's really a conscious preparation, even though the goals are the same. Like part of your preparation is to minimize risk, maximize outcomes, get ready for the experience. But yeah, I think there's overlap in those two camps for sure.
Yeah, and I'll be transparent that that statement about harm reduction is a little CYA. Like, you know, a lot of these substances, depending on where you live on the planet, are illegal. I don't think they should be. I'm a cognitive liberty advocate. I think people should have the right to alter consciousness if they choose. And I think, like we often talk about on this podcast, psychedelics have the potential to be very, very transformative for people. Healing in some ways, creativity boosting in other ways. But like we'll talk about today, they can also be disruptive to people, and not everyone should use them. And your preparation matters with something like this. So disclaimers abound, but I think the content will be useful nonetheless.
Yeah, preparation matters. It does. It's probably, along with integration, of course, one of the most overlooked or rushed parts of the experience. Even in today's world of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy structure being, more and more commonplace within like clinics and retreats and things, people might view it as it's my prep session or two, rather than long-term prep of getting to know oneself, the more intermediate term prep of taking on practices to help you navigate and get ready, like mindfulness, breathing, like fine-tuning the body and the mind, and then the nearer term of like unearthing your intentions as the journey approaches.
Right. Yeah, well, let's get into it. I think I was just, as you were talking, I was remembering that a friend of mine from the Air Force, psychiatrist buddy of mine from the Air Force, he was in the office next to me at Barksdale. We had a lot of good times together, but suffered together too. He texted me out of the blue and said, "Hey man, I know you're into this psychedelic stuff, but I am getting so many of my patients asking me about microdosing, asking me about going off their SSRIs, or can they go to this psilocybin retreat in Jamaica, or can they go do ayahuasca in Costa Rica and still be on their SSRIs?" He's like, "What's going on? Point me to a resource." There are a lot of good resources out there, but just to kind of highlight again the need for good psychedelic education.
And you bring up another good point, is preparing for a journey might involve tapering off medicines that could interfere or be unsafe along with the psychedelic medicine, for example, and doing that over many months, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's try to structure the conversation here around preparation. When I think of the domains of psychedelic preparation, I think of at least four, right? There's physical prep. We can talk about that involves psychological and a prep, spiritual prep, and social prep. I'm sure there are many more categories, but that's just kind of the way I organize it in my mind. Any additions or subtractions to that list, do you think?
No, I like it.
So psychological prep, I think about, I start with physical. Let's start with physical. So you mentioned the medicines being something that you might need to consider. Like, what medicines are you on, psychotropics or otherwise, that may or may not interfere with the medicine or be contraindicated with what psychedelic you choose to use or you're going to use. But also just preparing your body. Like, what are your sleep habits like? What are your nutrition habits like? What are your physical movement habits like? Are you seeing a body worker to help you with the knots and kinks and energetic dams?
Are you addicted to caffeine, and might the shaman or medicine team ask you to stop that for a few days surrounding the ceremony? And if so, what would that be like, right? I've seen many people go into their journeys with an unfortunate headache for that reason.
Right.
Yeah. Even though there are lots of nuances to that and ways to navigate it, but I think it's a good example of physical prep. Another one that comes to mind is I remember being in an ayahuasca ceremony once with a bunch of tight male dudes who couldn't sit still because their hips were so tight, and they'd never done yoga in their life, and they had to squirm, and it was highly distracting to them. And it made me remember this idea that, like, the Buddha, once he left the kingdom and started on this path, legend has it, that he did a bunch of yoga in order to be able to sit still long enough to actually attain enlightened states. And I think the same applies to ceremony. Like, can you sit still long enough?
Yeah, I was thinking for some of these psychedelic ceremonies, your physical limitations could, as you're stating, could really limit the potential for the experience that you have. Because some of these psychedelic ceremonies are physically arduous. Like, you hear about ayahuasca in particular, or we had that episode on ibogaine, and for some people, their psilocybin experiences involve trembling and tightness and changes of position and purging, and they can be physically challenging. So it makes sense to be physically prepared, and being limber is one of those things, but being in good cardiac health, probably good too.
Yeah, practicing breathing, just learning to tune into the breath as an anchor during difficult times. Like sitting in meditation is a good practice. Doing breath work is its own journey that we could talk about, and we have talked about. But there are certain key practices like meditating, mindfulness, ability to be with your body in an experience like that. Yeah,
that's popping in my mind for physical prep is, and there are overlaps between these four categories, but getting to know your body, like inhabiting your body, being attuned and embodied, like we've talked about in other episodes as well, but like getting really, really acquainted with when I experience this thought or this feeling, it manifests in this way in my body. Like how are those things connected? Because you're going to experience your body in different ways, typically on a psychedelic medicine. And so it helps. It helps to know what your body's all about.
Last month when I went out of the country for a ceremony, we had some preparation from an elder in the Blackfeet tribe who gave this really great metaphor that I'll never forget and has already proven very useful, is the idea that in your head, it gets a little bit chaotic, and I use the tree analogy. It gets windy up there in the branches and the leaves. Remember to come back down to the trunk where it's more solid. Just such a simple way to remember to get out of the head, into the heart, into the body, into the embodied experience, because that is your greatest resource for navigating like a wild psychedelic journey. It's just think of all the resources we have by being embodied beyond just the breath.
Yeah, it's so, I love that metaphor because you hear words like grounding and anchoring. I mean, they all sort of create this image of coming down and being stable.
Yeah, climb back down.
One of my favorite guided meditations to use in preparation for a psychedelic experience involves imagining your feet as you sort of feel your feet and contacting the ground, sort of growing tendrils of energy, roots down into the earth, all the way to the earth's core, and just feeling connected to the earth. And then out the top of your head, other sort of energy and tendrils go into the cosmos, and you're just this nexus point between being grounded on the earth and connected to perspective out into the universe.
Yeah, I love that.
That grounding is so crucial.
Yeah, because one of the biggest fears people have during a psychedelic experience is, well, losing one's mind, losing oneself, dying, never returning back to home base, to like normal waking reality. And being able to ground or have that ground control skill is crucial for being able to actually surrender into the experience.
It's a good segue into the psychological category, I think, of preparation, because one of the things that people often struggle with is fear and resistance and anxiety when it comes, especially if it's their first altered state experience.
Yeah.
And fear often leads to resistance. Like when we're scared of something, we don't want it. We want it to be away from it or for it to go away from us. And oftentimes in a psychedelic experience, if what is presented to you or where you find yourself, if you resist or if you try to control, that's when it turns distressing, or people have those quote unquote bad trips.
What you resist persists. What's another saying? There's got to be a catchy one about what you persist turns into a scary monster in your face during a journey.
It reminds me of the Harry Potter thing. I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, but there's some scene in those movies where they're dealing with a little creature that turns into whatever they fear. And one of the ways they deal with it is they laugh at it. Like they make, but in order to do that, they have to embrace it. They have to allow its presence, right?
Yeah, you need to get to know and befriend your fears. You've got to, ideally, during preparation, do a lot of work on getting to know yourself, including the resistances that will likely come up when faced with this difficult task of letting go. Like, what do you hold on to in day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most useful forms of psychological preparation is getting to know your triggers. Really following those triggers all the way down to, you could call it trigger mapping, right? Just sort of mapping all the triggers that you can, all the way down to their roots.
There's an idea I like. That's a question I'm still sitting with year after year, is like, I once read that enlightenment is following one thing through all the way to the end. And what you said about triggers makes me think of that, like getting to know your trigger. Triggers are friends to follow, right? The obstacle is the path, and following it to its origin. If you can connect it to the earliest time in your life when you felt that way, or other contributing factors to why does, someone honking the horn at me cause this reaction in my body, or why did I have this hysterical reaction to someone's like innocent little comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of talk around self-awareness, and what I think there are some assumptions about what self-awareness actually means that are probably wrong. But what you just described sounds like if there is real self-awareness, that's at least part of it. That being able to follow what manifested in you, what was triggered, not your triggers, but to follow what was triggered all the way back to its origin story, or to where it began, to its origin. Man, that is powerful self-awareness. And there are people listening to this right now going like, cool, how? I don't get that. Like when something's triggered, I just feel crappy. But you kind of gave us a hint when you said, think of the earliest time in your life when you felt something like this, because it probably started when you were young.
Yeah, I've done this practice with countless people before journeys, ketamine and other things. It was, in fact, part of our protocol in that ketamine study we did of like an emotion-focused approach to CAP, where before the session we would do a process of self-exploration of thinking of a recent trigger, tracing it back in a meditative guided way to the earliest time you felt that way, and looking at your unmet needs at the time, how it felt, remembering the scene. But then you're drawing this bridge like, oh, wow, the compassion that rushes in as you get some awareness of why you just reacted to this little trigger that might have otherwise be embarrassing, or you might have some self-criticism around, that you just drew this compassionate bridge and created a new narrative around like, oh, that's why, and that's how awareness is half the battle. Now I can heal it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like if you can do what you just described and bring that into a psychedelic medicine journey, you're probably going to increase the likelihood that healing happens. Like that kind of pre-work, that kind of preparatory work for a psychedelic experience is game-changing.
Yeah. What triggers you? What do you resist? Like, what do you avoid? And what are you afraid of? Like,
yeah, and I think one form of preparation, in addition to what you're talking about, is to practice being in the presence of your triggers.
yeah.
So, I mean, we've talked about it before, or at least referenced it before. You can just practice being in the presence of discomfort. Like you can do the cold plunge or the sauna or breath holds. You can go on a strenuous hike. Just surrendering yourself to discomfort is a great way to practice for what might show up in a psychedelic experience that could involve a lot of discomfort. Like practice, what's it like to just, I don't like being cold. I'm going to sit here with put my best mindfulness hat on and just notice being cold.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on how I viewed these triggers or uncomfortable situations a year ago, several years ago, and how I seek them out now, like whether it's cold plunge or a practice like Sananga, those eye drops that burn your eyes for a minute or two.
Yeah, those are unpleasant to say the least.
Yeah, unpleasant. Before I did them, I was like, well, like, why the heck would I do that? But now I'm like, when's the next chance I get to do Sananga and have my eyeballs feel like they're burning so I can practice surrender? And I think the reason is because it's come in so handy in day-to-day life. The ability to sit with the discomfort has done more to help me grow and navigate life than anything I can think of in this moment.
We talk a lot about that from this perspective, from this Eastern perspective of equanimity and mindfulness. But I'm also reminded of the science on grit and perseverance, people like Angela Duckworth. And that is one of the characteristics of resilience and grit, is this phenomenon of being present to your discomfort without engaging in any kind of avoidance.
I brought a bottle of Sananga from Four Visions Marketplace. Shout out. Non-sponsored. Great organization. Purveyors of good hot bays from the Amazon, for example. But I brought it in my fanny pack on a hike to, it's now called Kiv Peak in Provo, up Rock Canyon Park, and then had Hannah Sananga shaman me at the top of the mountain, which was, it was a fun practice. It's kind of, just to Yeah. And then there are other reasons people do it for, like, that surrender practice helps you really be present. Like, then you have this clarity, this presence, this clairvoyance, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what becomes clear when you are very present. And there's nothing like discomfort when you surrender to it to bring you into the immediate moment.
Yeah. So, preparing for your journey, and look for ways to sit with discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Go to a meditation class, even if you've never been, especially if you've never been, because they're going to make you sit or lay there for an hour, and that may not be your practice. But if you go to an ayahuasca retreat or you fly off to the Netherlands to a psilocybin ceremony, you're going to be there on a mat, in a seat, maybe moving around a little, but for hours. Yeah.
And if you want to do something more simple, just set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Sit and stare at a wall and pay attention to what I call craving self. So anytime you experience the thought, the sensation, the urge to do anything other than stare at the wall, like, oh, I wonder you mindlessly reach for your phone to check a social media app or something like that, or I'm kind of hungry or I want to move right now. You just say in your mind or out loud, if you want, craving self, and you just notice it. And you'll discover, like, a lot of what you do day to day, moment to moment, is an automatic habitual responding to, I don't want to feel something, or I do want to feel something.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. That's a great practice. Another way of moving towards triggers that I'm just thinking is, go to all the family dinners you can. Have all the deep chats with your significant other. But I mean, I say it playfully, but really there's this idea that is quite true, that we are mirrors for each other, and we have these blind spots that we can't see until they're reflected back at us by someone close to us. Close to us meaning, like, you might get triggered at the grocery store and you could do some processing on that, but there's nothing like the container of a loving relationship especially your closest ones in life, to see those and work on them. And it's a beautiful way to bring stuff up during these preparation phases.
Yeah, it dovetails nicely with the other category that I mentioned, the social preparation.
Yeah.
And again, these all overlap, like I said before, but I think part of preparation is if you're lucky enough to have these people in your life, like, who among the people who love you and that you love could you talk to about this? Could you talk to about going into ceremony or journey? Or could you talk to about your experience? Because shit gets weird when you're on a psychedelic.
Yeah.
And you don't want to cast those pearls before swine. You want to be really discerning about who you share these, what can amount to be sacred experiences with.
And speaking your intention, or working through it, your potential intentions and what you're going through, helps find it and make it real, especially as you're approaching it. There's something special about both writing it and speaking it out loud.
Yeah, and maybe even workshopping it. Like, if you've got a therapist or a coach or a trusted loved one, hey, this is why I think I'm doing this. What do you think? Not that you should outsource it necessarily, but workshop it.
I love that question. I do it almost just for fun too, asking people, like, ooh, what would you prescribe to me as an intention? Just this, like, because it's hard to get honest answers of, like, what should I work on? And you got to also take it with a giant grain of salt. But it is really valuable to try and see yourself through others' eyes, especially people who know you really well,
right,
in that safe container.
You gave me an intention once when we were doing our experiential training for our ketamine study with Phil Wolfson. I remember I was asking you, like, I don't know, and I think you suggested, show me who I am. And it was just simple, and it was exactly what I wanted, but I didn't know I wanted it. And I took that into my ketamine experience, and it was my favorite ketamine experience by far.
That was a fun story to hear about after. I still remember it. I have my own picture of it, even though it looked probably different in your dream state.
Yeah, it was a great example of what you just said. And when I've traveled for ayahuasca ceremony, I've workshopped my intentions with people that I really trust, whether it's a loved one, somebody like you, my wife, therapists. It's helped tremendously. I mean, I've done the majority of the work on my own because it is my intention, but it helps to get feedback.
So one other thought, there are lots of other thoughts on preparation, but one thing that comes to mind is this idea that when you sign on to a ceremony, that's when the ceremony begins. Like what did Leo Zeff say? He was the secret chief. He was famous for saying, the trip is already begun. And it's pretty neat to think about, like once you commit to doing a journey, like whether it's your first or 10th ketamine therapy experience, a month or 6 months away, or ayahuasca in the jungle next year, or whatever it is, something coming up soon, that's when like you can start to feel the ripple effects, because understandably your soul, your psyche is anticipating. The fears start to come up, like the soil starts to get tilled along the way. So I think it's a really neat concept.
Yeah, there's an old Stoic quote that's, I'm going to butcher, that I heard Ryan Holiday talk about. He's trying to market his new book, but it's something like, if you don't have a destination in mind, then no wind is favorable. This is a shipping metaphor, I guess. So when you've set your course on this psychedelic journey, all of a sudden the wind that's blowing there anyway, perhaps, becomes favorable. It's already propelling you toward this ceremony, this journey, and the potential insights there. But that's certainly been my experience with a lot of my ketamine clients, is we're going through the preparation process and we're talking about intentions and they're having their preparation sessions. A lot shows up just in the preparation phase. And frankly, a lot of work gets done in the preparation phase if they take it seriously.
Yeah, and I love the ship metaphor as well, because like I like to look at, all of life's a ceremony, right? We're preparing as we go, we're integrating as we go. We have these it's punctuated by these little mystical experiences and rituals and psychedelic experiences. Medicine or not, like life could deal you some psychedelic blow. That's an intense trip in itself. So we better be preparing. But also there's this river of our lives that we don't have entire control of. Like you basically have as much control over how your psychedelic journey goes as you have control over how your life goes, right? Like you can shape it, you can gently steer it. You can get your sail up and ride that, but like you don't get to pick. You don't get to pick at all.
No.
Yeah.
I like that. I like comparing it to life generally, because when I think back on my life, like sure, there are certain decisions that I made, but what influenced those decisions? So much context. I mean, there's so many dominoes that were knocked down way before I was born that ultimately led to the opportunities that were presented me to make certain decisions. So I try not to freak myself out too much about this with life or with psychedelic experiences. And we'll talk in a second about surrender, but I think it's important to keep in mind.
But then our preparation becomes this attitude or this stance of getting ready to be shown whatever is going to be shown, and then getting ready to do with it what we will, instead of getting completely blindsided or reacting in some, huge resistance or fear. That stance of surrender, that the practice begins long before your ceremony.
Yeah.
The ceremony is the preparation too, essentially. But Leo Zeff, just a little tangent, as I think it's a fun story of his life. He was the secret chief. There was that book, I think, in the 80s that came out called The Secret Chief, because he was the Johnny Appleseed of MDMA. And even in that book, he used a pseudonym. I think it was Adam something. And he even called MDMA Adam
yeah.
was his nickname because it brought you to this return to innocence, I guess. But he started out as an LSD therapist, kind of pioneering this psychedelic session approach, eye shades, music, like holding space. And then it was the Shulgins who introduced him to MDMA, and he was like, boom, mind blown. And like they say, he was responsible for introducing MDMA to 4,000 therapists.
Wow.
The Johnny Appleseed of MDMA. But I heard this tribute by Terence McKenna on YouTube of Leo Zeff, and it was the sweetest thing. Like, I think Terence McKenna said something like, I've never met anyone with such kindness, wisdom, humor, like as Leo Zeff, like a gentle giant. And Terence said, he even said to Leo, like, wherever your canoe is going, I want to be on it. I want to be in it with you. And then Leo said something like, you are always welcome in my canoe. Yeah. So I thought it was a fun tribute to him.
What a beautiful soul.
Yeah.
I love these characters that are, these people who are, I don't know what you would call them, but I guess they're characters in the story of psychedelic medicine, modern psychedelic medicine. There's
even a quote I pulled that Leo Zeff shared with Terence twice in like the 6 months, maybe leading up to his death. And I don't know, I haven't even fully read it yet, but I could read it and we could just see what it holds.
Let's experience it together, yeah.
Because it's by Rainer Marie Rilke, if I'm saying the German name right of the epic writer. Leave your opinions their own quiet... Okay, I'm starting over. Leave to your opinions their own quiet, undisturbed development, which, like all progress, must come from deep within and cannot be pressed or hurried by anything. Everything is gestation, and then bringing forth, to let each impression and each germ of a feeling come to completion wholly in itself, in the dark, in the inexpressible, the unconscious, beyond the reach of one's own intelligence, and await with deep humility and patience the birth hour of new clarity. That alone is living the artist's life, in understanding as in creating. In that there is no measuring with time, no year is of any value, and 10 years are as nothing. Being an artist means not reckoning and counting, but ripening like the tree, which does not force its sap and stands confident in the storms of spring, without the fear that after them may come no summer. It does come, but it only comes to the patient, who are there as though eternity lay before them, so unconcernedly still and wide. I learn it daily, learn it with pain to which I am grateful. Patience is everything.
I like that. What came up for me was the balance between being patient but not idle.
Yeah.
Right? I think when we're preparing for a psychedelic experience, we're patient. We're not forcing. We talked about surrender, the importance of letting go and being curious. But we're not idle either. We're doing all this other stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're working on ourselves. We're working at self-development. We're working at self-healing and self-awareness. So patience, yes, but don't be idle, I think.
Everything is gestation and then bringing forth. I just lost my voice. Yeah, it's an amazing quote about preparation. Like all progress must come from deep within and can't be pressed or hurried.
Right. Yeah, must come from deep within. So you can't force it, can't press it or hurry it, can't control it. I think, is there anything we want to say specifically about intention setting along those lines? Because people go in, we do psychedelic journeys for reasons. And I think it's important for you to be thoughtful about why you're doing it. And there could be a lot of different reasons why a person would engage or submit themselves to a psychedelic journey. And I think, as I said, people should be clear about that. Is it for healing? Is it for problem solving? Is it for deep spiritual exploration and growth?
Yeah.
Is it just as Duncan Trussell, as we heard Duncan Trussell say at Meet Delica over a year ago, is it just pure hedonism, in there for enjoyment? Why are you doing it?
That might be someone's intention. I think that's a really important question is, why are you doing this? What moved you to sign on to this? And as a starting point to understanding, your possible intentions and motives. And there can be multiple, and it's all good, but then the intention without attachment is such an important concept. Like we're saying, your intention could be surrender, show me whatever the hell is going to come up, which is beautiful. Or it might be a question, like you were saying, show me who I am.
Yeah, I heard intentions called once a loosely held hope. And that makes them different from expectations, right? Our expectations are, this is what must happen, or, if this doesn't happen, I'm going to be really disappointed. And you should be thoughtful about disappointment. It's okay to feel disappointment. But I like the intention attitude better, I think, as a preparation tool than an expectation.
Yeah.
It is something we would like to explore or unfold or understand better or heal or transform or whatever. But as one of my ketamine clients put it the other day, I didn't get what I asked for, but I got what I needed.
Beautiful.
Because he brought in his intention, but then followed the instructions of, this is what I want, but show me what I need. Like, surrender, let go through.
Yeah, that's so key. The difference between the expectation and intention. In fact, I've always loved looking at it through a yoga lens. Like in yoga class, you might hear, what's your intention for your class today? But if you go deep on it in like the Sanskrit terms, like the intention, sometimes the word sankalpa, I think in Sanskrit, is like a seed, or could be translated like a vow birthed from the very core of your being. And then if I look at it that way, like you're going looking for what's alive in you, like you're doing a deep inward dive, finding out what intentions are coming from your heart, not your expectations of your mind. And then in this fertile ground of ceremony, like preparing, and especially during the experience, in that therapeutic state of consciousness, you're really planting that seed. And then the work, the journey, like creates this bridge to the everyday waking consciousness, manifests it into day-to-day life, which I think like helps that seed grow, germinate, gestate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good sort of combination of a lot of these principles we're talking about, with diving in, paying attention to your triggers, origin stories, and patience, but not idleness. There's a quote by the poet Mark Nepo that I like. To listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear.
I love that.
And that willingness part is really, really important. Along the lines of that surrender piece. Like, sometimes if you don't have that dial of willingness turned up to 11, then you're going to miss out on some really important lessons.
To listen is to lean in softly.
Softly, with a willingness to be changed by what we hear.
Yeah, that's a key part of the recipe.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of people go into ceremonies saying like, yeah, I just have this question, but don't tell me anything about this part of my life. And sure, there's a readiness, but and you can't tackle it all at once for sure. But yeah, that's some interesting resistance to explore right there.
It makes me think of the one time I was in an ayahuasca ceremony and I really didn't want to puke. Right?
Oh yeah.
First time I had ever experienced ayahuasca, I vomited. It felt like the universe went through my butt and out my mouth. It was
simultaneously.
Yeah, it was like I channeled the entire energy of the universe through my body. It was intense, and it was great. I mean, I really did. Honestly, like when I was done with my purge, it was clarifying.
Gold star.
I got the gold star.
Wow.
But my subsequent journeys, I've just, in sober space, I was thinking about that experience. Like, yeah, it was good, but I can't say that I want to do that again. And I'm in ayahuasca consciousness, and I'm feeling sort of bubble guts, and it's coming up, and I'm fighting it. I'm not listening. I'm not listening softly. I'm not willing to puke. And this is weird, but we're talking about ayahuasca. As soon as I finally said, you know what? Fine. I will puke. I will crap my pants. I surrender. Went away. Didn't need to puke anymore. One of those fun little lessons grandmother ayahuasca had for me.
What you resist persists.
Yep.
I don't know if this story is relevant or a lesson of that kind at all, but I was off at an ayahuasca ceremony helping with the retreat, but got to sit with the medicine a couple times. And one night I was called up. It was working with this Shipibo medicine team where they do some hardcore chants at you, at your soul, at your psyche, and they really get in there with you. It's beautiful. And I was called up and being chanted at, and I forgot my bucket. And in my experience, I hadn't thrown up most ayahuasca ceremonies, so I wasn't too attached to the bucket. But this chanting can really bring on intense nausea. Like, I've seen it countless times of just chants, boom, an orchestra of throwing up ensues. But I was up there, and the nausea is mounting, and I have a lot of resistance to throwing up, and I have a good ability to squash it, even though I don't, I'm not proud of that. It comes in handy sometimes, but I was sitting there and mustered up all the, vomiting self-interruption I could to stop it, and I stopped it. I even asked for help at some point. I was like, help, but no one heard me, and that was another lesson in itself. But the next day, I'm sitting there at breakfast with the shaman. I was like, that was intense when you were chanting at me. I was hanging on for dear life. I almost threw up everywhere. And he's like, Reid, you're doing it wrong. What do you think I was doing in there? I'm trying to help you clear some things out, and you were resisting it. You're getting in the way. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's apropos what we're talking about. So we talked about intentions versus expectations, physical prep, some psychological prep. Spiritual is one we didn't talk about explicitly, although a lot of the things we just discussed would probably qualify.
Yeah.
But I think, depending on your relationship to divine, to source, to the highest self, to the unknown, pick it, whatever it is. I think it helps to contemplate your relationship to it before you go into a psychedelic experience. We have measured in the lab that psychedelics tend to occasion mystical experiences that tend to be very, very meaningful for people. So, buckle up. Even if you are not a particularly spiritual or religious person, you're likely to have some kind of mystical experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Pays to prepare. Anything else, Reid, around preparation? A lot of good resources out there on psychedelic preparation. We were just talking about Strassman's book, The Psychedelic Handbook.
Yeah, that was a great preparation chapter, I think. But yeah, just this idea that all life's a ceremony, and we should all be preparing as we go, and as these special opportunities come up, that's when a chance to really buckle down. Look at ayahuasca as an example. You have a month, the 2 to 4 weeks leading up to that, to really tune in to your body, your mind, your spirit by eliminating things and getting ready. I think it's a special opportunity. And then afterwards, it's not right into the hamburgers. It's practice some of that on the tail end too. That I think is part of the magic of that medicine, in addition to the medicine itself, but the ceremony around it. And I think we can take a page from that in all of our psychedelic experiences, medicine and not, through life.
Well said. Thanks, Reid.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.